Sauron is the Dark Lord most people remember because his shadow hangs over the Lord of the Rings. He has the ring, the eye, Mordor, and the armies that nearly bury the West under ash. But Sauron was not the first Dark Lord. Before him there was Melkor, later named Morgoth, and the uncomfortable truth is that Morgoth was worse in a deeper way. Sauron wanted to dominate the world. Morgoth wanted to break the world until nothing in it could exist without carrying his wound. That difference matters because it changes how we read evil in Tolkien. The ring is not the beginning of the darkness. It is a late echo of something older, larger, and more poisonous. The simple answer is that Morgoth was Sauron's master. Sauron was a Maya, a powerful spirit, but Morgoth was one of the Valar, or at least of their order before he fell beyond them. In the beginning, Melkor was the mightiest of the Ainur who entered the world. He had a share in many kinds of power, which made him brilliant, restless, and dangerously proud. Sauron is frightening because he is disciplined. Morgoth is frightening because he begins near the top of creation itself and then bends that greatness toward possession. That is why comparing them is not just a question of who had the bigger army, it is a question of what kind of evil each one represents. Sauron is the tyrant who builds a machine for control. Morgoth is the rebel who looks at creation and cannot bear that it is not his. Morgoth's fall begins before there are towers, kingdoms, swords, or rings. It begins in the music of the Ainur, where the world is first imagined through harmony. Melkor does not merely sing a wrong note. He tries to force the music to answer him because he wants themes that are his alone. That is the seed of everything that follows. He cannot delight in beauty unless he owns it, and he cannot accept freedom unless it serves his will. This is already worse than ordinary conquest. A conqueror wants land, tribute, obedience, and fear. Melkor wants reality itself to admit that he is the source. And because he cannot truly create life from nothing, his pride curdles into envy. He becomes a maker of distortions, a master of damage, and a lord of things twisted from better beginnings. When the Ainur enter Arda, Melkor's rebellion becomes physical. The young world is being shaped, and he tears at that work again and again. The Valar raise mountains, kindle lights, order seas, and prepare a home for living things. Melkor answers with violence, freezing, burning, throwing down, and poisoning. This is one of the clearest ways Morgoth is worse than Sauron. Sauron inherits a wounded world and tries to master it. Morgoth helps make the wound. He destroys the two lamps, and the first ordered shape of the world is ruined. Later, with Ungoliant, he destroys the two trees, and the light of Valinor is plunged into grief. These are not just military victories. They are attacks on the conditions that allow beauty, memory, and hope to flourish. When Sauron makes the One Ring, he places much of his power into a single object. When Morgoth fights Arda, he pours himself into the very substance of the world. That is the idea behind the famous contrast often called Morgoth's ring. Sauron's ring is gold. Morgoth's ring is Arda itself, because his malice has seeped into matter, fear, and history. This does not make Sauron weak. In the Third Age, Sauron is still a catastrophe waiting to happen. He can corrupt kings, direct armies, deceive the wise, and bend entire peoples towards his designs. His evil is cold, organized, and terrifyingly practical. But Sauron often wants order, even if it is a dead order with himself at the center. He wants systems, ranks, walls, roads, furnaces, spies, and commands.
Morgoth becomes less orderly as he falls. He begins as a spirit of immense range, but his hatred makes him crude, wasteful, and ravenous. That does not make him less dangerous.
It makes him dangerous in a more primal way. Sauron wants every will to fit into his plan. Morgoth increasingly wants every will to be diminished, mocked, or made afraid of existing. If Sauron is domination as architecture, Morgoth is domination as contamination.
One built a prison, the other poisons the ground beneath the prison. Morgoth's evil is also worse because it attacks living forms. Tolkien is careful about ultimate creation because true independent life belongs to the creator, not to a rebel spirit. So Morgoth's pattern is not pure creation. It is captivity, breeding, torment, imitation, and corruption.
That is why the origins of orcs are so disturbing in Tolkien's Legendarium. The details vary across versions, but the moral horror remains the same. Morgoth does not simply command monsters, he makes monstrosity out of violated life. He does the same kind of thing with fear. Dragons are not just large weapons. They are ancient malice given voice, hunger, and a terrible intelligence. Balrogs are not just fiery soldiers.
They are spirits of ruin who followed him down into flame and terror. Even his fortresses feel less like kingdoms than infected wounds in the earth. Utumno and Angband are places where the world seems to be forced into hatred.
Sauron's Mordor is dreadful, but it is still a realm with logistics. Morgoth's northern darkness feels like the world remembering pain. Morgoth's hatred of beauty reaches one of its sharpest points in the story of the Silmarils. These jewels preserve the light of the two trees, and their beauty is not merely decorative. They become vessels of memory, craft, longing, and sacred light. Morgoth desires them because he cannot create that beauty, and he cannot bear for it to remain outside his grasp. So he steals them after the murder of Finwë and the destruction of the trees. Fëanor then gives him the name Morgoth, the black foe of the world. That name is important because it is not just a personal insult. It identifies the scale of the crime. Morgoth is not only an enemy of elves, men, or Valar. He has made himself the enemy of the world's wholeness. The Silmarils burn him, yet he sets them in his iron crown. That image tells you almost everything about him. He would rather suffer possession than release beauty. He would rather be wounded by light than admit that light should be free. There is a reason Sauron often feels more present to readers. We meet the consequences of his choices in a more intimate story. The ring tempts Frodo, Boromir, Galadriel, and even Gandalf. It speaks to recognizable weaknesses. Pity twisted into pride, courage twisted into command, and wisdom tempted by necessity. Sauron is also still active in the story most people know best. Morgoth is gone beyond the walls of the world, but Sauron's will is pressing at the door. So Sauron feels immediate. Morgoth feels mythic. But mythic does not mean less real inside Tolkien's world. It means the damage is older than the map the characters are holding. By the time Frodo reaches Mordor, the world is already a post-Morgoth world. Death, domination, corrupted creatures, and the weariness of history all belong partly to that older disaster. Sauron is the enemy of the age. Morgoth is part of why the ages are broken. My read is that Sauron is the more effective villain in a story about temptation, but Morgoth is the greater evil in the mythology as a whole. Sauron can be resisted by refusing the ring. Morgoth cannot be resisted so neatly because his defeat does not remove all his contamination. That is what makes him so much worse. He changes the background conditions of life. After Morgoth, evil is not only an army marching from a dark land. It is also fear in the body, violence in memory, suspicion between peoples, and the slow fading of things that were once unmarred. This is why the War of Wrath is so enormous. Morgoth's defeat requires a cataclysm, and even victory breaks Beleriand. The world is saved, but not restored to what it was. That is a very Tolkien kind of victory. Sauron's fall at the end of the Third Age is also immense, but it is more concentrated. The ring is destroyed, his power collapses, and his organized threat is removed. Morgoth's fall is different. He is thrust out, but the world he damaged remains, the world everyone else must inherit. Once you see Morgoth behind Sauron, the Lord of the Rings becomes darker and stranger. Sauron is no longer the first source of evil, but the greatest surviving student of an older rebellion. The ring becomes a smaller version of a larger pattern. Put power into the world, bind other wills through it, and make freedom depend on resisting something beautiful, useful, or necessary. That pattern begins with Melkor's desire to have a theme of his own. It ends, in the Third Age, with a little circle of gold that offers everyone the world at the price of themselves. The tragedy is that Sauron learned from the worst possible master, but he also narrowed the lesson. He turned cosmic rebellion into political domination. Morgoth wanted to be the reason creation sounded different. Sauron wanted to be the ruler of the version that remained. That is why Morgoth feels less like a Dark King and more like an original fracture.
He is not just the villain at the end of the road. He is the crack running beneath the road.
So yes, the Dark Lord before Sauron was so much worse. Not because Sauron was harmless, and not because the ring was a small thing. Morgoth was worse because his evil was older, broader, and more intimate with the world itself.
Sauron threatened to enslave Middle-earth. Morgoth helped make Middle-earth a place where enslavement, terror, and corruption could take root. Sauron is the shadow that returns. Morgoth is the wound that never fully closes, and that is why, behind the Eye of Mordor, there is always a deeper darkness, the first Dark Lord, still echoing through the world he failed to own but managed to scar. Thank you for keeping the Black Quill Society company in the archives tonight. If this little expedition into the original bad influence earned its candlelight, subscribe, pull up a chair, and I will see you in the next one.